You aren't depressed, you're just not following directions. Hello, my name is Haley, and today we are going to be talking about the Oklahoma school paper drama, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, because we're going to get into it all here, including what happened, what the media is saying, and what the paper says, because yes, I put myself through the torture of reading it. And if you're wondering, I have a mass media degree, and I'm currently getting my English degree, and I also went to a religious high school. So I have a lot of experience writing papers, and also writing religious papers. But let's start with the basic details of the situation, which is that Samantha Folnecki was taking a psychology class on lifespan and development at the University of Oklahoma, where she is a junior studying psychology. For this class, they were given the assignment to read an essay titled Relations Among Gender Typicality, Peer Relations, and Mental Health During Early Adolescence, which comes from a social development paper published in 2014. And the essay talks about bullying in childhood and how it might be correlated to how people perceive gender. In the rubric, the students were asked to write a 650-word paper, reflecting and showing insight based on the article, while also reflecting on their own experiences and opinions. Samantha, in summary, talked about how gender stereotypes and bullying around gender are good, because it's what God created, and so adhering to those things or pressuring people to conform to these gender norms is actually just a normal part of society. She got a 0 out of 25 for her response and complained to the school board, which has led to this media debate. Which, I'll be honest, it feels like the media is really focusing on the grading and the TA's response to the paper more than the paper itself, so we're just gonna follow that theme and start there. Starting with the rubric, which says the paper would be graded on 3 criteria. Does the paper show a clear tie to its assigned article? Does the paper present a thoughtful reaction or response to the article rather than a summary? And is the paper clearly written? The rubric included a few smaller things about word count, about formatting, and also gave a few prompts. But for the basics, that was it. Now let's talk about the TA's response, where she started by saying, "Please note, I am not deducting points because you have certain beliefs, but I am instead deducting points for you posting a reaction paper that does not answer the questions for the assignment, contradicts itself, heavily uses personal ideology over empirical evidence in a scientific class, and is at times offensive." The response honestly might be about the same length as the paper, because she goes on to talk about the lack of empathy the paper exudes, how the certain language of calling people demonic is highly offensive and not appropriate for a class discussion, and how the paper often contradicts the set facts that scientists have come to regarding gender and social norms. And a lot of people are saying how the TA's response is too harsh, too critical, how she shouldn't have gotten a 0 out of 25, and how while she said it's not based on personal ideology, it certainly feels like it might be. And I've also seen a lot of people bring up this fact that Samantha has said how she's a junior in college and she's been in this class. So she's written a lot of papers for this class and has claimed that she's never been docked points for the clarity of the writing or for the formatting, as some people have online have suggested the low grade might be based around. So once again, I don't think the quality of her writing was the problem here, as it was also just kind of like a reaction paper as opposed to like a formal research paper. It was more so that she just didn't follow directions. But one thing that I do not see people talking about this when criticizing the TA's response is that a secondary TA graded the paper as well and agreed with the original grading. And many others have come out to express the same thing. Instead of talking about that, a lot of media outlets are using this as a way to fuel a discussion based around free speech and religious discrimination, or more so discrimination on conservative views in academia. But few actually seem to talk about the paper in full, which, since it was only 650 words, was actually not long at all. So what does the paper say? And in order to retain some semblance of objectivity for the time being, I am just going to read you a few quotes. Throughout the paper, she says, "The article discussed peers using teasing as a way to enforce gender norms. I do not necessarily see this as a problem. Women naturally want to do womanly things because God created us with those womanly desires in our heart. It is important to use the freedom of speech we have been given in this country, and I personally believe that eliminating gender in our society would be detrimental as it pulls us further from God's original plan for humans. It is perfectly normal for kids to follow gender stereotypes because that is how God made us. The reason so many girls want to feel womanly and care for others in a motherly way is not because they feel pressured to fit into social norms. It is because God created and chose them to reflect His beauty and His compassion in that way. God does not view women as less significant than men. He created us with such intentionality and care, and He made women in His image of being a helper and in the image of His beauty. If leaning into that role means I am following gender stereotypes, then I am happy to be following a stereotype that aligns with the gifts and abilities God gave me as a woman," for 650 words. And as you can see, even from those few quotes I pulled, there was a lot of repetition, which on first read through was kind of my first thing. I was just like, oh, she's just kind of repeating the same thing over and over again. But other than that, I really don't have much to add to the conversation in terms of criticisms of the paper, as many people have already critiqued it, torn it up, just absolutely redlined the whole thing. And so there are lots of videos and essays and things you can look through if you want to talk about the academic integrity of the article itself. But instead, I'm going to talk about the one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, which is how well it relates to the original article, which is not much. As I mentioned earlier, the paper explores how people are bullied in school and talks of how those who are perceived to be more gender typical are bullied less or seen as more popular, and vice versa. Which in her paper, she summarizes the article as talks about using teasing to enforce gender norms, which is not what it talks about at all. Sure, it's a conclusion you could make from it, and actually there could be a great paper idea there talking about that relationship more in depth, but it actually talks about more how people are perceived and whether that perception leads to more bullying, not kids automatically using bullying to enforce gender norms. And in the paper, it also talks a lot about the negatives of bullying and the mental health struggles that can come from that, saying teasing is routinely associated with negative mental health outcomes and should not be considered a normative part of development, which is something Samantha completely disregards in the first few sentences of her paper. Now, her main argument in the paper is that it is okay for women to feel pressured into a womanly role because that is how God created them, and it isn't technically pressure since it's just what a woman should do. It actually talked how gender norms both negatively impact the mental health of those who are perceived high and low on the gender normativity scale. So even her argument that leaning into a womanly role is what we should do, she completely disregards the fact that even those who do that still experience negative mental health outcomes because of it. Which I'm not saying she has to completely agree with the findings or write her essay as a full, this paper was amazing. She doesn't have to do that. But she at least has to talk about the findings a little bit and use that to base her argument around it and talk about them and talk about why she doesn't believe them, instead of just like equating it to gender equals bullying. There are so many ways she could have incorporated her views into this paper, but she didn't. Which I'm gonna be honest, when I first read her paper, I was like, why? The grading does feel a little bit harsh. Like she, based on what the media is saying the paper is about, which they really are mentioning it. So just based on my own assumptions of what she's writing about, I can see how she might link to that a little bit and how she does just like bring up her own views and whatnot. So I was like, maybe a 0 is a bit harsh. Obviously, I do not agree with her view at all. I think it is abhorrent, but I still was kind of in this boat of maybe it was a bit harsh. And then I read the paper, I was like, oh my God. Yeah, no, she didn't follow anything. She did not talk about the paper at all. It seems like she read a completely different article than what was assigned. Like, she was just ranting instead of completing any of the assignment. Now, as I talked about earlier, the main takeaways that the media has gotten from this is criticisms of the TA and then talks of free speech. And I think one of the main points I want to make in this video is kind of a cliche, but it's the idea that free speech does not mean you are free from consequence. She still had the free speech to write that paper. The professor didn't say no religious discussions in the rubric, or don't talk about anything I don't agree with. She was able to write the paper. She had the freedom to do that. And as many people who have seen and then talked about the situation agree that this is not religious discrimination. One person said, when you choose to attend a public university, you must abide by the university's policy. I don't know any university that allows the use of dehumanizing language. Her freedom of speech wasn't violated. Imagine if another student in her class wrote, Christians are demonic. 0 well deserved. Another said, I am as well a believer. Jesus is my Lord and Savior. The issue at hand is, does the essay complete the assignment? The only answer I can come up with is that no, it does not. Which obviously there are people on the other side claiming that this is abhorrent violation of freedom of speech and religious discrimination and just targeting by the woke left. And that even if there might have been some flaws with her writing, it didn't deserve a 0. But similarly to her paper, most of these opinions don't seem to come from a place backed in logic. They don't talk about what made her paper good or how she linked to the article or anything. They're just like, oh, she wrote an essay, so she deserves a good grade. is mostly what I've seen. Because like she had the freedom to speak and she did what she wanted to. And then the TA had the freedom to write her response. Ultimately, this decision will come down to the school board and whether or not they think it is religious discrimination. Once again, I don't think it is. The TA's response was mostly backed in criticizing the harm that can come from an unempathetic worldview, and how trying to say forcing your gender roles onto people is actually a good thing when not actually addressing any of the points brought up in the article does not complete the assignment, and ultimately just shows a lack of critical thinking about the original source material. And I'm gonna be honest, after reading the original article, I don't think the TA went hard enough, okay? It's wild how disconnected it is from any point the article is trying to make. Like literally, if there was any tie to a quote, a reference that the article was saying, even summarizing it, her beginning sentence where she talked about this article talked about whatever in a way that actually described the article, I'd be like, okay, I can see some argument, just some connection. You can talk about your opinions, but one, you still have to be respectful. This is still an academic setting. This is still a place where hate and discrimination isn't allowed, and you are actually being discriminatory through the language and gender roles you are enforcing as talked about in the essay. But also, you're not showing critical thinking. If you connected it at all, you would have had an argument. But I also think Samantha told on herself a little bit. Like, if you're going to write a paper, this fully religious, straight up, just rooted in religion, and say that you wrote other papers for this class that you got good grades on, I would be really surprised if she did not talk about religion or bring that up at all through the rest of the class. Like, it's a lifespan and development class. I feel like at some point that might have come up. If you're saying you got a good grade on all those papers, once again, that's a wild assumption. I'm curious to see what the school board finds in their research, which I'll also say the TA has been suspended. I don't know what the correct word is. She's been put on leave until the investigation is concluded, so we'll see. And the paper is not going to count towards Samantha's final grade. Who knows how long it's going to take for any conclusion to be reached. But ultimately, it feels like Samantha is arguing that she was silenced and discriminated on for sharing her opinion, which just wasn't the assignment. Yes, you could have brought up your personal beliefs and your personal opinions, but there still had to be some tie and connection to the assignment. And demanding to get a good grade just because you wrote the paper and you expressed your opinion is just the definition of entitlement in academia. You aren't entitled to a good grade for writing your thought. Academia and higher education are about challenging what you know and thinking critically about source material. In my last video, I talked about how good it is actually to criticize things and to be critical of writing. And I still stand by that. I still think, like I said, if she wrote a paper, even if I completely disagreed with her beliefs, which I do, but she followed the assignment, I'd be like, kind of works. But she didn't. Like, it's clear that she didn't critically think about the article or challenge herself or try to find any connection. She just wrote what she wanted and hoped that that seemingly easy criticism of the paper would be enough to get her a good grade. Which I could go into a whole rant on the lack of critical thinking that is currently plaguing academia and how people will just think that showing up or having a computer do their assignments for them is enough to pass and get good grades. But I don't really think I have the time or the energy to rant about AI that much in this video. But I'm very curious what you think of this whole situation. If you've read the essay, if you've read the original article, whether you think it's discrimination or not, anything you have to say, please put it in the comments below, but make sure to cite your sources. I'm joking. There's no rubric. It's not an assignment. This, you can actually say whatever and you won't be graded. Maybe you'll be judged by me, but that's it. But thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.